We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power, coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. It's actually nighttime here and I'm experimenting with the light. Tell me how you like it. What are we doing today? We are doing the Aughts, the decade without a name, going from the year 2000 to about 2011 in our How We Got Here series, number 11. And before we get into that, let me just mention something that just came up. I just discovered that pretty much no matter what I do, I will not be able to get monetization due to the fact that I live in Georgia, due to the fact that I don't have a physical address that I can send anything to, due to the fact that getting an envelope here in Georgia is almost impossible. And I'll talk to you more about that at the end. But I just thought I would mention that now. So, essentially, I'm on my own. But that's okay. It's nice to have gotten to 1,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. Didi Madlobaz, they say in Georgian. But, hey, you guys have been helping me out so far. I'm sure you will continue to do so. So let's talk about where we're going tonight. First of all, the problem with looking at events as they get closer and closer to you is you get more and more information because it's still fresh and hot. And you're never quite sure what to include and what not to. You want to include everything because you know, especially doing a YouTube video, there are going to be people out there, and you might be one of them, who say, hey, wait a minute, you forgot to mention Hurricane Katrina or the, Boxing Day tsunami. And I go, well, I just mentioned them. Because they aren't particularly germane to this particular study of how we got here. Nevertheless, I mean, if I was doing something really complete, maybe I would do that, but I'm not. This is all about how we got to 2021 at this point. When I started it was 2019. I somehow, or maybe 2018, I somehow imagined, no, it was 2019, that I would get here a lot quicker. But what happened was at a certain point I decided to start using examples. You can see the moment in my videos when everything changes. I think it's about number 6. And then all bets are off. I decided I don't care if this gets monetized. Now it's not going to get monetized. And even if I could, and I could by having someone else receive the postcard and such like this back in Alaska. But even if I could, I've thought about it and I said, I don't want to make you folks suffer with ads, so I'm just going to go on. But anyway, the point is, everything is still too close. Not enough is known yet. It takes time to understand what happens. Most historians say it takes at least 20 to 30 years to begin to understand an era. So, do I understand 2020 yet? It's still this blast of stuff hitting us. We're not out of that woods yet. I just heard of things going on in Minneapolis with renewed interest in the court hearings of Officer Chauvin. Is that going to get strange? Oh yeah, that's going to get really strange. So, we don't know what all of this is leading to. It takes a while to see where it went. So, also, there's a tendency to be too politically biased, too emotionally biased. I'm probably, even with this period, which goes back 20 years, but comes up to 2011, so that's 10 years ago, we're going to start getting into things here that more people have hot feelings about. And if you have a hot feeling about it, well, I'm really happy for you. And there's nothing I can do about that. I'm trying to hold these with tongs that are a bit more impartial, if I can. And there are many things that people believe now that relate to this period that I just don't, it's just like, to me, it's like, okay, right, left, right, you've got your own little thing, whatever. I'm not interested in debating what happened. These are just the things as I see them. If you see them differently, you know what? You could make your own video. Takes a while. There are no neat divisions either in our eras. And as we'll see, I'm going to start with the year 2000, but I don't think that's the beginning of the 21st century at all. And that's the first thing I'm going to discuss. But I'm going 2000 to 2011. Now, the reason I chose 2011, I will get to, but that's where the dividing line seems to actually be. And 2001 is where the dividing line actually is. Actually, that's neatly 10 years. It doesn't often happen that way. For instance, I think one thing you can say about where we are, for instance, there are many things in the early aughts, and that's what we're calling them, that are really connected to the late 90s. A lot of the culture is still very similar to the late 90s, but not similar to the early 90s, nor similar to the late teens of the last decade. So there's all of that. So what happened on January 1st in the year 2000? That's a really good question. A lot of people think that that was the beginning of the 21st century. But you know what? They're wrong. I mean, they're as absolutely wrong as they can be. Because a decade does not start, with the year 1980 or 1990 or the year 2000 or the year 2010. It starts with the year 2001. That's when things actually start. And the crazy thing is, we didn't act that way. We acted as if, I think it was just seeing all those zeros come around. It was like watching a slot machine. That really was. For many people, it's just like, whoa, look at all the numbers. Welcome to the new millennium, which to me is a very fascinating thing. And our misunderstanding of when the decade, century, millennium ended and started is so indicative of everything else that's happened since then. Because it is just a prime example of total stupidity. Total near global. I think the Russians opted out of this system. But I think they said, no, it's really 2001. But I mean, it was like almost near total stupidity created by the media.
The 20th century was from when to when?
January 1st, 1901 to December 31st, 1999. Is that correct?
A century is a complete period of exactly 100 years, not more, not less. Each set of 100 years is a century. Therefore, a century begins when you start at 1 and stops when you reach 100. For example, the first year in the first century AD is known as AD 1. Therefore, the last year of the first century is AD 100. Sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? However, you'll see many places on the internet that claim that the first century AD begins at AD 1 and ends at AD 99. This is obviously incorrect, as that does not provide a full set of 100 years. As a result of this error, your counting of the years in each century will always be incorrect by 1 year.
The 20th century was from when to when?
January 1st, 1990 to December 31st, 1999.
Do you think there's 9 years in the 20th century?
What? I'm so confused.
That's so funny. these people who they don't know anything about when a century begins or even a decade. It's all confused in their minds. But that shouldn't surprise anyone. How did we get to that point? We got to that point. See, I remember, I was born in 1955, so I was pretty conscious in 1970, and no one celebrated the beginning of the 70s. I don't remember anyone celebrating the beginning of the 70s in 1970. Everyone said in 1971, oh, the 70s have started. Very different. Oh, by the way, why do I call this the decade without a name? I meant to say this earlier. It's because I'm calling it the Aughts. That's what we call the era in the early 20th century. That was the name. All my life it was like 2006, or it was 1906 was what they call it, and that would be the Aughts, and not the Aughies or something like that. Now in Britain they call it the Naughties because naught for them means the same thing as odd, which is zero. But what happened was when we arrived at this point, at this new decade, people didn't know what to call it. So some people called it the O's because, it was 2000. Well, guess what? O is a letter, not a number. Some people called it the zeros. I can't even deal with that. And the more common one has been people calling it the 2000s. But that doesn't make any sense either, because isn't it going to be the 2000s for the next 100 years then? So, but why didn't we call it the Aughts? For the very, very same reason we didn't wait until the year 2001. That reason is we were way too cool. In other words, we were way too stupid. And what that means is that set the tone for the rest of the decade and actually up until the present. This ingrained stupidity inculcated by the media, propaganda, the government, the economy, and everything else has been a reigning feature of the 21st century ever since. I am hoping we will find a way out of it. Maybe now that we're in the 20s and we know where we are, we actually have a name that actually works as opposed to the 10s, whatever that is. They were the teens last time. Why did we change that? Because we're stupid. That's why. We've lost things in the mix. And I'm just one of those people that just say, I don't care. I don't want to be cool. I'm done being cool. I want to be as truthful as possible. I want to understand things as much as possible. And, oh God, help me, I do not want to be stupid. And you shouldn't want to be either.
The 20th century was from when to when?
1899 to 1799.
1990 to 2000.
But somehow by the time of Prince's song, We're Going to Party Like It's 1999, the stupidity had arrived. This blindness of where we were. People want, and the media then started to pump. It wasn't just because of the Prince song. There were other things, but started to pump this narrative so that by the time we got to 1990, that was the beginning of the 90s. And, and now you might be saying to yourself, well, Bern, there's always someone who'll say things like this to me. This, all those dates are just a fiction. No, they're not. They're on a calendar. That's not fiction. Yeah, we agree upon that. But then again, we all agree that if you jump off a bridge, you'll probably fall. Probably. It's everything is, in a sense, an agreement of some sort. But somewhere down the line, things got weird. Now, I want to read you a quote from Jean Baudrillard, the French theorist. And I read a similar quote that I have in a different book, but I found this quote online, which is close enough, where he talks about our problematic relation with the coming millennium back in the 90s. He says, The population, who are ultimately indifferent to public affairs and even to their own interests, negotiate this indifference with an equally spectral partner, and one that is similarly indifferent to its own will, the government, le pouvoir, the power. This game between zombies may stabilize in the long term. The year 2000 will not take place in that an era of indifference to time itself, and therefore to the symbolic term of the millennium, will be ushered in by negotiation. So what he's saying is, the quote that I remember from this other book is, we may never arrive at the year 2000. And he proved to be right. And what he meant is that we're living in, and by simulation, he does not mean the simulation theories that we've since come to discuss, that, maybe we're all living in a simulation. No, he means the simulacra. The thing is, we're creating this false world around us so that, and it's the media, it's the government, it's the organs of propaganda, it's education, it's books, it's art, it's almost everything that is creating this with our complete consent, even though there are people who will say, no, I don't see it that way, and yet they're also part of it. But we've created this illusory version of reality. Here's the point, though. Reality is still there, and will remind us, as in the COVID example, that it is on occasion. That suddenly, all bets are off now, But the point is that in a way we never got to the millennium. And he says we have to enter it by negotiation. I think by now we can finally say it's here. That is to say, the events we're seeing in the last few years are certainly not 20th century events anymore. They don't bear any relationship to the 20th century any longer. Which is fascinating because, in a way, the 20th century didn't arrive until 1914 with World War I. I mean, that was still all felt like the 19th century up until then. Now, one thing that's interesting is that in the year 1900 and the year 1901, guess when they celebrated the 20th century arriving? Let me show you this article. And in this article, you will see that indeed they waited. They listened to the people who understand numbers and dates. Oh my goodness. How come we couldn't do that? Because by that time, we are so overwhelmed by these media voices. And of course, what's happened since then is the media voices have gotten smaller, but proliferated like mad, like hornets, like wasps, like, bees. Just these little buzzing sounds. But somehow we listen to them and go, oh yeah. And so somehow it would have been considered, what? Pedantic to have insisted on the year 2001 as the beginning of the millennium. Or kind of like, especially given the way people were acting at the end of the 90s, it would have been like uncool. You're just being stupid. It's the year 2000. As if, I, who did not go along with it, I celebrated the year 2000, going, yeah, that's a lot of zeros. But in my heart, I knew it was the next year, and I celebrated the next year as that. And the way I got around describing it to myself was it's the millennial year. All from 2020 through is a special time. And it's a time that won't occur again. So that's how I said it to myself. Interestingly, almost nothing of value happened that year. A few things, but probably the most important thing for the future of where we are now is the knife-edge decision between the election of Bush versus Gore. Now, I'm going to mention political things tonight. I'm going to mention wars, but it is not my intention to go into a history of these things, as much as it is to talk about how they affect us where we are now. So much of the Bush administration, much of the Obama administration, etc., much related to the Iraq War, much related to September 11th, much related to the Afghanistan War, doesn't really matter in terms of what we're dealing with now. It's something that happens, in some cases still is happening, but it is less, it's not the kind of thing that's pushing us forward. Sometimes, though, these things will have an effect on us, and that's what I am here to discuss. The day the decade started, I think we can all pretty much agree the 21st century actually started on September 11th, 2001. That's when an event so large occurred that it caught the attention of literally the entire world through the media. And I remember where I was in Alaska. I was program director at the radio station KHNS. And I got a call at 6 in the morning, 6:30 or so in the morning, saying, Bern, do you know what's going on? I go, no, because I'm asleep. And he says, well, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. And they're not sure. And I was thinking of there was a small plane that flew into the Empire State Building. I believe it was in the 30s. And I was thinking of that. And so I immediately got up. I said, okay, well, this sounds serious. And I went up to the radio station. I changed everything over. I canceled all the programming for the day and kept it on news. Except for 1 hour when I went to music, which got everyone really upset because they didn't want to break from their paranoia, But I was there in time for the second plane. Now, here's the thing, is I lived in New York a few years before this. Everything you saw is part of the catastrophe of the World Trade Center, people running away from buildings. I would have been working, if I was there that day, and still working at that place, I would have been working literally in the middle of all of that happening. So I had a very deep connection to this. Plus, where I was living the last year I was in New York City, I would have been in the zone from which no cars were allowed. And I would have been able to watch the entire thing on my roof. So it hit me quite hard. And I realized, what more is there to say? I mean, yeah, I could tell you more about what I did at the radio station. I could tell you about things you can watch on a documentary. All I want to say is this. How big was September 11th? Well, let's put it to you this way. If a plane had flown... let's start this way. If a plane had crashed in a field in Pennsylvania and all the people died on board, that would have been a huge news story. And it would have been one of those things remembered as one of the most important news stories of the year at the end of the year. People would say, yeah, you remember that? And they go, yeah, that was bad. But then if someone had flown a plane into the Pentagon, well, that would have pretty much been front page news for a long, long time. That would have been probably the story of the year. But then someone flies a plane into the World Trade Center, a massive plane into the World Trade Center, a 747 into the World Trade Center. That would have been beyond any normal story for a year, let alone for it to happen twice. And then to have both buildings collapse. There was no category for that. That was just simply stunning. No one had ever seen anything like that before. It was so stunning that when a building fell later, an entire building, I think it was like at least 30, 40 story building, fell later in the afternoon, no one even remembers it. And that would have been the story of the year had it happened. So that's how huge it was. It changed everything, not only in America, but in the world. But it wasn't a conspiracy, except by the extremists who committed it. And yeah, there may be some of you who say, yeah, it had to have been a conspiracy, and you have all these reasons. We'll get to conspiracies in a bit, but let me just give you a preview on that, a hint. I don't actually care, because what I'm talking about is not why things happen. I'm talking about how the things that do happen affect us. But we're going to talk about conspiracies quite a bit, a little bit down the road on this. So if you're one of those people who's got a few conspiracies up your sleeve, well, I dare you to stick around. So, but what's also interesting about that moment is what it meant to Islam in America. Obviously, there were a lot of people who were mad about, there were people saying, maybe we got too many Muslims in this country. There were a lot of people who didn't understand why that might have happened. I had, the year before, been in Romania in the year 2000. And there weren't many Romanian Americans in the country at that time. And I was in Bucharest. And all the movies were big American movies. And the stuff on television was American. And they had all these conceptions about America. But it was like America was colonizing their mind. And I could see resenting it, especially since we weren't sending our best. In the year 2000, the people in Bucharest, Romania asked me, so, do you like Britney Spears? To which I said, are you kidding? Of course not. That's just like pop trash. But that is what we were exporting to the world. And, if I was in some small Islamic country and these are the kinds of things I was seeing, I would have some pretty twisted visions of America as well. Besides all the geopolitical stuff that went on, in all sorts of countries. But I'm just simply saying the American presence, all this big shiny stuff we sell, it isn't necessarily a very good thing. It creates an image of America that isn't the land of freedom we say we have. It's something very crass, something very weird. At the same time, we do make very good things. For every bad movie we make, for every 20 bad we make, maybe we'll make one decent one that really gives something worth watching. But let us continue with the war on terror and its response. And by its response, I don't mean the response of the military. That's our war on terror. I'm talking about the response of the terrorists to the war on terror. This gets into all this political stuff, and this is where I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want to mention these things because these things become very important. The creation of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the DHS. About 20 or more government agencies were put under this umbrella or created and put under this umbrella. It had still does have massive authority. The whole point is information retrieval. Following up on that, you have things like the USA Patriot Act. This gave the government unlimited access to information, the kind of information that would later become a problem, the kind of information that is now a problem. The you can say, well, I was a Republican. They needed to do these things to stop terrorism. And I'm going like, well, you handed away your freedom. That's what happened with that. And it's fine when it's the people on your side of the fence who are controlling things. So then you're a Democrat. Later, Obama's using the same things. All I can say is things get invasive, and they are invasive. Now, I'm not going to go any further into the politics of this, but essentially such sweeping powers were given for information gathering. And what's interesting is the Democrats, who of course hated Bush, because Democrats always hate Republicans. Republicans hate Democrats. Oh, God, it's tiring and exhausting to hear these people talk about each other. But the point is that the Democrats, in order to attack Bush and all that he was doing, kept saying one thing over and over and over: you didn't do enough. In other words, we need more security. We need more security. What was the FBI doing? What was the CIA doing? How come we didn't stop all this? You didn't know? And people got so mad at this. I was listening to this going like, don't you understand? The more you prod for more security, the more of a nightmarish dystopia you are creating. Because we now have the ability to snoop on everybody. So I'd just like to thank everybody on both sides of the political aisle for creating that effect. But here's the point. So, part of our response on the war on terror is the Middle Eastern wars, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Our hostility, which, of course, we had to do something, then provoked more retaliation. So, consider the attacks in Bali in 2002, or even later in 2005, or Madrid in Spain in March of 2004, or the London tube and bus attacks in 2005. And so we had to do something. And so what we decided to do was to go back to where we thought we could change things. So one of the things we thought was Osama bin Laden turned out to be responsible for the September 11th attacks and Al-Qaeda. So we will go to the country where they are ensconced, and we will deal with them there.
America strikes back. Afghanistan is pounded with bombs and missiles from the air and sea.
We are supported by the collective will of the world.
Homeland Security has stepped up to protect against retaliation, and bin Laden himself sends a videotaped threat to the American people.
It wasn't a good solution, because one of the problems with terror is it's really squishy. You step on it one place and it shows up somewhere else.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Later came the whole thing with the war in Iraq, which was, shall we say, quite a bit different. This was connected to the September 11th bombings in the name of weapons of mass destruction, which were not found. But essentially, with both of these wars, they're both wars of continuation. Afghanistan has been a mess ever since the British failed to deal with them back in the 19th century. The Russians went in there. They got bogged down. And somehow we thought we wouldn't. We are still bogged down in there today. Why? We don't understand desert, mountains, or Islam, really. And so there's a lot of stuff going on there. I'm not going to begin to discuss that. Interestingly enough, there was a part of America, the best part of us, that said, we don't want to blame all of Islam for September 11th. Just these extremists. And London and Madrid and Bali and all these other places, the Orlando shooting or whatever. We don't want to blame all of Islam, which was a good thing. But then somehow that turned into people saying, so don't yell at Islamic folk. Don't do that. And then eventually this word Islamophobia started to creep into the mix. And then strangely, Islam became like a protected class. And there are other people sitting there scratching their head going like, well, who then did all this bombing and stuff? An interesting thing that was also a result. It was a result of us almost being too Christian and forgiving and taking the Christian principles without being Christians and understanding that, well, there are other sides to the coin here. And so then there's the problem of enhanced interrogation. And so all these suspects were picked up. And all I can tell you is that enhanced interrogation, as we came to discuss it then, was really just another word for torture. Whether it was playing music all night long or waterboarding or, some of the scenes we saw in Abu Ghraib, the prison, or some of the things we heard about in Guantanamo Bay, it was all too much. People were really mad, but after a while, America became numb to these things. We became numb because we couldn't put it into a box. We knew we should do something, but the problem with dealing with an amorphous enemy is that you're never quite doing the right things, which makes you the perpetrator. And so there's this sense in which, this is why these kinds of attacks work so well, is because they make the attacked one look really bad in the end, rather than look like victims. In the late 90s, technology seemed to be everywhere. Little did we know that by the year, say, 2011, just to pick a convenient date, what we experienced in the late 90s was going to look like ox carts and wagons, because so much more would change. Consider what happened with Napster, the first really popular music file sharing site, which ended up doing things like contributing to the downfall of Tower Records, the largest music store in America. Consider the iPod, which we're watching these squiggly little dancers for now. Oh, they look so cool, and the iPod is just this thing. It was actually a great marketing campaign of these dancing silhouettes with the white wires. Although, in fact, the iPod is an ugly-looking little white thing. All those little everything white and computer-like back in the late 90s, early aughts, it just still looks ugly today, which is why Apple was seen as being so important to the design of things, of creating things that people might actually want to use. Also, iTunes came out around the same time as the iPod, which was the thing that really started to push Apple to become a much bigger entity. They were failing prior to that. But iTunes made people want to use their system on the iPod, and then eventually they were saying, like, well, maybe I should integrate it with the whole Apple, environment. Or consider Amazon and what that meant as far as ordering, and eventually what that would mean as far as Kindle and streaming and downloading. Now, essentially what we didn't notice was the effect this was having on brick and mortar stores. I live in Georgia right now. In Georgia, there are no places to buy DVDs or Blu-rays. I mean, there's a couple places that maybe have one or two, but basically there are no places. I actually went to look for a Blu-ray player here. There aren't any in any of the biggest electronic stores. Why? Nobody uses them because they're too poor to afford to buy product. So what do? They actually download everything off the internet. And what do they pay for? Nothing. They have figured out a way, much as in the kind of the spirit of the Russians, of getting everything online. I mean, I take advantage of it. I feel like I'm on the outside of the Western world. So either that, or you folks are in jail and I'm in a free zone. But the point is that it does mean something. If no one's reading actual books anymore, and everything they're reading or watching, more likely, is online, this really changes the nature of everything. So you don't even get out of the house to go shopping. You get your dopamine rush online for that few seconds while you're looking around, and you go, I bought it, and then you go back to normal humdrum reality. So cell phones were everywhere. And I thought they were bad at the beginning of the aughts. And I never got one. I lived in Alaska. I didn't need one. And I would just tell people, if I'm not in the house, you don't need to talk to me. And that's still kind of my thoughts, even though now I carry a little dumb phone around with me. A little dumb phone like this. I carry it around. I'm getting almost to the point where I'm going to have to eventually give in. And there are always those people who will say to me, well, maybe now you do, Bern. And whenever I hear that, I go like, man, I want to hold on to this for another 10 years as soon as you said that. It's not going to be a nice day when I transfer over to the smartphone. But this is where we're going in a second here. But anyway, laptops were ubiquitous. And then there was a remarkable improvement in digital cameras. If you remember the way digital cameras were in the early aughts, you'll remember they were pretty bad. It took several years for them to get enough pixels to look really good. So people were hedging their bets on film, as they should have, for quite a while. But even in 2005... people still used regular phones. They were taking these little square photos. You may remember them. But something was going to happen, which was going to change not only phones and computers and photography, but everything.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just It didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
I don't want to go on a long ramble about Steve Jobs. But the point is, the smartphone changed everything. And not for the better. Whether it's something as kind of silly as the selfie, nevertheless, silly as the selfie is, there's something sad and tragic about it as well. I did a whole take on some of the things I'm about to talk about in my 21st Century Cargo Cults video. I suggest watching that as a adjunct to everything I'm saying here. But I'm not going to repeat a lot of that. But the point is that the cell phone changed our relationship to everything. A friend of mine here, a guy who's half Austrian, half English, but grew up in Brussels and now has a Georgian wife with half Georgian children. This is a typical kind of thing I run into here. Told me about 10 years ago, you'd go into a restaurant here and the men would break into song so easily. Today you go in and it's rare to run into that sort of thing. Why? One answer: cell phones. The cell phone stands between us and the world. It is a constant lens out into the world. It is a constant accumulator of information back. But what it means is we can no longer see the world. We no longer understand the world. I get endlessly saddened, pissed off, irritated, annoyed by people's behavior with cell phones, the way they act when they're in a room with you. I remember the first person who came into my house who had her new cell phone, and she could no longer interact with us because she was so fixated on it. I remember when people would stop and say, "Oh, I just got an announcement. Oh, this thing just happened." Well, yeah, why couldn't you have waited? If I could take back anything from the last 20 years, I would smash every cell phone, and especially every smartphone, because they have not added to our lives. They have only detracted from it. I mean, there's always a good thing you can say. Oh, I was able to find out that my mother was sick. Or I was able to, find my friend at the train station. They got lost. That kind of stuff. Enough said. But if you have any humanity in you, you know what I'm saying is true. You know This has been a poison pill that we have swallowed in the name of convenience, in the name of being cool, in the name of selfies. It's really bizarre. And to go along with that is the creation of another thing. YouTube. You're watching YouTube right now. YouTube has been a game changer. But YouTube in the late aughts was still fairly primitive. I mean, people were getting a lot of hits on really stupid things like cat videos and, fails, whatever they are. I know what they are, but whatever they are. Because it's such a stupid term. But we will save discussing YouTube for the teens, the next series, because that's when YouTube really comes into its own. And then there is social media. Now, there were different sites like Friendster and can't remember all the names, but the first one to really pick up attention was MySpace. I had a MySpace account. I designed a really cool looking set of graphics for it, because that's the thing, is you could design your own page, unlike Facebook, unlike almost anything else. And that was a really great feature. But let's watch a little bit about the creation of MySpace.
Welcome to another Cold Fusion video. MySpace was one of the first social networking sites to reach mass adoption. It was worth $12 billion and outranked Google as the most visited website on the internet. It was the place to be and took the world by storm.
I like MySpace a lot. It's a friendly environment to me. I meet a lot of new friends. It's a great place to share music, videos.
But I think every page you go to has got graphics and flashy stuff to catch your eye.
Everyone had a MySpace account, and they were all eager to find out what these new social networks were about. And then, all of a sudden, people just stopped using it. MySpace launched in 2003 and grew quickly. People flocked to the site, and it became the largest tech success to come out of Los Angeles.
First time I heard about MySpace was through a friend of mine. I don't know what exactly it was, but she told me it was something over the internet. You create your own account and profile.
I know some people are like, I hate MySpace, effing MySpace, and then as soon as you're on MySpace, they're like, oh, who's that? And they start looking at pictures.
My MySpace page has this, it's got this picture that I created in Photoshop as my background. I'm a people person, I like to meet people. It's just cool how you can meet people on the computer, this virtual realm.
So MySpace basically shot itself in the foot, but it did so after its younger sibling was already starting to tear up the town, and that was Facebook. Here's an early interview with a almost infantile-looking Mark Zuckerberg.
And now there's a new form of cyber matchmaking, college networking websites. Is this perhaps the next big thing? In Hartford, Dan Stillman, co-creator of Wesleyan University's Westmatch.com, and then in Watertown, Massachusetts, Mark Zuckerberg, creator of Harvard's TheFacebook.com. Mark, if somebody was to put the question to you about the magnitude of what you think you've launched, how big do you think your product or your service is?
Well, it's impossible to tell. When we first launched, we were hoping for, maybe 400, 500 people. Harvard didn't have a Facebook, so that's the gap that we were trying to fill. And now we're at 100,000 people, so who knows where we're going next. We're hoping to have many more universities by the fall, hopefully over 100 or 200. And from there, we're going to launch a bunch of side applications, which should keep people coming back to the site and maybe could make something cool.
What is the Facebook exactly?
It's an online directory that connects people through universities and colleges through their social networks there. You sign on, you make a profile about yourself by answering some questions, entering some information such as your concentration or major at school, contact information about phone numbers, instant messaging screen names, anything you want to tell, interests, what books you like, movies, and most importantly, who your friends are. And then you can browse around and see who people's friends are and just check out people's online identities and see how people portray themselves and just find some interesting information about people.
Now, Facebook, and then all of the things that have come since then. Twitter shows up, Instagram. Eventually you get things like Snapchat, and now we've got TikTok, and there's all these other platforms that come and go. But the point is, Facebook still is, it's not the OG. That would more be MySpace. But it is the thing that really caught on. And everyone, I remember when I first heard about it, only my college friends, and I'm not in college, and I wasn't then, obviously, had it. And then eventually I was able to, and they kind of were like, well, we're glad you're on it, but it seems a little less cool now. And then eventually when, my long-lost cousins from Seattle were on it, and other people who just didn't seem to be at all like computer people, then all the people who declare what is and isn't cool said, Facebook isn't cool anymore. Well, Facebook, however, remains very, very important. And these things all put together, the iPhone, which eventually had very good camera, very good computer, and of course it's still a phone. The YouTube, social media in all its forms. When those three things came together, now we put together something. It's like in the late 90s, you had the internet come together. But there's something even more powerful about social media and all the things that go with it, of which the cell phone and wireless technology is all a part of it. So it created a world that by 2010, a pastor in Florida could threaten to burn the Quran and create an international incident.
A small-time pastor who has stirred up a big-time controversy. His congregation is only a few dozen strong, but his plan to mark 9/11 by burning the Quran has sparked protests as far away as Kabul, while drawing condemnation from the Vatican, the State Department, and the commanding general in Afghanistan.
You're prepared to do this, and prepared and ready to incite violence.
We are definitely prepared to do this. We are definitely prepared to give our lives for this particular message and cause, yes.
Will you be armed?
Yes, we will. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we could see a gun battle out here.
We could. We have been threatened.
Jones says he's been asked directly by the FBI, the Department of Justice, and local Gainesville law enforcement not to go through with the Koran burning. But he won't listen, to them at least.
Now, what's strange about this whole thing is that even 10 years earlier, a cranky pastor in Florida threatening to burn a Bible wouldn't mean anything to anyone. And this says something about what the next decade is going to be. That a little thing here or a little thing there will set off some sort of weird eruption somewhere else. That the effect of sharing these videos, of sharing photographs, of posting on different platforms is really going to be explosive. And we think we control this. We do not. I don't have any illusion about this. I only hope when I talk that what I am saying, that I'm responsible, and dear God, I'm responsible for not saying or implying things that you, the listener, will somehow misconstrue. I can't obviously guard everything I say. I have to also try to speak the truth, and so you juggle these things. And then, of course, there were advances in gaming, video gaming. Not just video gaming, but also gambling gaming. But that's outside of what I want to talk about. But the advances in gaming were such that the graphics were getting so good, the gameplay getting so involving, and the cultures surrounding these things were also mushrooming because of social forms of media, not just the major platforms, but all these other things like Tumblr and Reddit And, well, we don't want to discuss 4chan, but then, there's all these like little other places that you go that are just for your specific game or your specific mythos. And of course, the thing which then happened, perhaps in many ways one of the darkest aspects of the Aughts, was the eruption of internet pornography. And it really was. What was available in the late 90s was just a little bit compared to what would be available throughout the next decade. And this changed everything as well. This changed the way people look at themselves. This changed the way kids learned about sex. I mean, people have always said, well, if kids sneak porn into their lives, that really will change the way they look at sex. But do you know how hard it used to be to do that? Like I say, I'm 65 years old right now. I'm old enough to remember when, you had to really be sneaky to look at the Playboy down at the magazine shop. And a lot of these kind of magazines, and these are just magazines that had naked women. We're not talking hardcore porn. Hardcore porn was not available at the local magazine store or at your grocery store or any other place. They just had a couple of magazines that had naked women in them. Eventually, the temperature started to rise throughout the 1970s. But then these seedy little stores emerged on the edge of town, or in the more sketchy areas of town, the 42nd Street and stuff, places that would sell porno mags and have these kind of sleazy sex shows. Then in the 1980s, they began to sell videotapes as well. And in fact, they sold so many videotapes on VHS that it was the porn industry that decided the competition between beta and VHS tapes. And because the porn industry was using VHS, beta died, even though many people said beta was a better format. But then what you start getting is in your local video store, you would find a little curtained off section, often beads on the curtains. And you walk in there and suddenly there was all these kind of romanticized covers of really, of pretty seedy porno shows. And then came the internet. Now, at first, it didn't seem like the internet was making much of a dent on this. And imagine this, throughout all of this process, if you were caught on the other side of the bead fence in your video store, you kind of felt like, I didn't mean to do that, especially if you were a kid. I mean, I wasn't a kid, but, it was just there would be the people who were watching out for that sort of thing. And it was even harder to get to these sketchy areas of town. And they didn't necessarily let you into those places, hopefully, because once you would go into those places, you saw stuff that would rip your eyeballs out. Well, by the end of the aughts, by the end of the 90s, that stuff that would rip your eyeballs out was easily accessible on the internet. So, the little town I lived in Haines, Alaska, had no Playboys in it when I arrived in 1996. There was no way to get your dirty magazines. You had to get a subscription or something. And like I said, Playboy being the most polite, almost not porn, airbrushed naked women. But the point is this, is that, in that little community, there was nothing there. But by the year 2000, I remember there was this one kid who, everyone know which kids in schools were just pickled in internet porn. So now it didn't matter anymore that you couldn't go into your seedy little place, because now everything was available. And when I mean everything, I mean if you do the wrong search, you will find images that will scar your brain out. I am not talking penetration here. I'm talking some deep, dark, ugly stuff. I mean, it's amazing how ugly pornography can be. Well, that changed everything. You ever wondered why so many women get their pubic area shaved and depilated these days? There is only one word to explain it, and that word is porn. It did not happen because of a change in the beauty aesthetics that just came naturally. It came because of a change in porn. Young kids today are very different from those extremely promiscuous kids of the 90s and early aughts. Why? Porn. I mean, yeah, you could say I'm blaming too much on porn. I don't think I'm blamed nearly enough on porn. We don't understand image addiction, the addiction to images, but it's real. What is the gambler addicted to? I'm convinced it's patterns. Simple patterns. And I think that's where video game addiction comes in as well. We get addicted to patterns. And I think all the images we have around us, I mean, advertisers know that if they show you a piece of cake in a certain way, you're going to want to eat it. Because you can ring those bells in us and we will salivate. And essentially what's happened by this point is that technology has invaded every area of our lives. Meanwhile, down in the cellar, interestingly enough, there were grittier versions of films coming out after September 11th. I think people wanted to see something gritty because life had suddenly taken on this other feeling. So whether it was a new James Bond films or No Country for Old Men or The Hurt Locker or Christopher Nolan's Batman movies or even Marvel's Logan, all of these represented a kind of a grittier version of things which in some other cases may not have been so gritty, particularly with Batman or James Bond. Virginia Wilson, in her book The Secret Life of Puppets, describes what she calls the sub-zeitgeist. The zeitgeist, which we'll come to very shortly here, maybe the zeitgeist in the 90s, or rather in the aughts, was Britney Spears or big budget fantasy movies and that kind of thing. But the zeitgeist always has with it a sub-zeitgeist, the thing that's under everything, the thing we don't really want to admit that's there. So after the World War II era, there was all this big band music, really sweet, easy listening music, photos of women reclining in chairs on beds, on couches, in flimsy clothing with little dogs. There were people listening to, silly songs like How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? But the underbelly was film noir, which talked of the real way that Americans felt, the doubts we really had at the end of the World War II and throughout the early parts of the 1950s. Well, the sub-zeitgeist of the aughts in the post-September 11th era was dark.
Jedes Jahr werden in Amerika 10.000 Menschen mit einer Schusswaffe getötet. Darüber hinaus werden über 2.000 Menschen erstochen. Amerikaner haben einfach keine Fantasie.
That was from Eli Roth's film Hostel, which is a rough watch, I will say, but I think an important film, and deals with, actually that was the trailer for Hostel 2, which was still very interesting. But I think that those Hostel movies deal with Americans going to Europe, not understanding a thing, and treating it like the way cool, like, youth Americans were traveling during that time. Completely unaware of the countries they were visiting, just looking for, the weed in Amsterdam or the red light districts, or looking for, just kind of everywhere was a recreational opportunity. Nothing, you didn't really look at anything anymore. Culture didn't mean much anymore. And so these movies stand against that. There was a word that was used, and it was called torture porn. I don't like that phrase at all, and that's the last time I'm going to use it. I don't like it because it isn't accurate at all. Yeah, there was a lot of torture in these films, but to call it porn, no. Porn implies two things that I don't think these films deal with. One, it implies that you're getting off on in a sexual way, or in some sort of ecstatic way, the violence and bloodshed. I don't think anyone who ever sat through a Saw film or a, Wolf Creek film got off on it. Secondly, porn implies reality. That is to say, real porn is real naked people inserting things into each other with no, it's no imitation sex scene. It's no, there's no cliches of substitute sex. It's the real thing. So there's no real torture going on. But this genre, let's call it the extremities of horror, or the extremities. And in fact, in the French version of this, they called it the New French Extremity. So I think extremity is probably a good way to classify this kind of stuff. The Saw films came out, particularly the first one, and there was like a moral to it. This guy was torturing people, but essentially he was letting them torture themselves in order to escape death because of their sins. Now, he was wrong in doing so, but it did make you wonder, what have I done? Now, these films involve some very, very uncomfortable scenes, like the one I'm about to show you now. You remember the warning at the beginning of this video? This is where it comes in. You can shut your eyes if you want, but you probably can't shut your ears.
By entering this room, a timer has been started. When the timer expires, the door in front of you will be locked forever.
Guys.
Only in finding the key before the timer runs out can you unlock it and retrieve the antidote inside. I will give you just one hint as to where that key is. It will be like finding a needle in a haystack. Let the game begin.
What are you doing? Go down! Shit! Oh my God. Come on! God, die!
Ouch! Falling into a pit of needles, hypodermics. And yet, oh my, what a symbol. To me, that's a symbol of America. We have, since the 1960s, fallen into a pit of hypodermic needles. We really have. I mean, so much of our world is just one drug after another, not just chemical drugs, but one drug after another to keep us anesthetized from searching, because we've swallowed the idea that nothing means anything anyway. And then there's one film, it is French, which to me isn't just an extreme film. It's not just an example of the new French extremity. It's not just a film which features torture, and it does. But it is a philosophical statement. It is a statement about the loss of meaning and the search for it. It is a statement that Pascal Laugier made this film called Martyrs. And it is something, for me, I'm pretty much convinced so far that of the first 20 years of the 20th century, this is my favorite film. Does that mean I'm recommending it to you? No, because I think most of you won't be able to stomach it. You might stick with some of my other favorites, like Pan's Labyrinth or something like this. But this makes Pan's Labyrinth look eligible for the Disney Channel.
C'est eux, Anna. T'as pu les voir? Ils ont changé, mais c'est eux.
So Martyrs is amazing stuff. And there were so many of these films at the time. Eventually, the horror scene would move into more ghosts and demons. And many people were saying, oh man, I'm so glad we're done with that. Weren't the horror films of the 2000s, that's how they'll say it, not the aughts. Weren't the horror films of the 2000s like the worst? And I'm sitting there going like, yeah, well, you must have not have been watching them because you couldn't take it. But in fact, there were some films that went over the line. A couple in particular I'm thinking of, which I didn't see because just reading it and everything I've heard since then told me like, that's over the line. One of them would be the Human Centipede series, which I'm not going to get into discussing here. And the other one would be, it's simply called a Serbian film, which goes so far over the line that most people that I have heard who've reviewed it have said, and I really wish I hadn't seen that. Well, you know, I haven't got anything to prove to anyone. I've seen some pretty terrible films in my life. I mean, terrible not just in bad quality, but terrible is like the kind of things that scar you, that I don't need to add to it over and over just to prove I can do it. I will take your word that Serbian film is something to avoid. And that is where essentially that genre ground out. Because there were people who were saying, well, what can we do? Well, at a certain point, there was a scientific experiment that used to be done in high school laboratories for students. They would take a freshly killed frog, and then they would strap it to electrodes, and then they would turn it on the electricity. And what happens if you plug that frog in and turn it up the electricity on the transformer a little bit, it starts to move again. And then eventually it stops. But if you turn it up some more, it'll move again. And then finally, if you turn it up all the way, it'll move and move and move, and eventually it will stop and never move again. Well, to me, a lot of what the horror films of the aughts were about was like a terminal moment in the history of modernity. It's the end of modernity. These were not postmodern films. They weren't really modern in the classic sense of the word either. But it was, to me, the plugging in of the electrodes into the frog and the last flickers. And Martyrs, for instance, is a really meaningful flicker proving that life is real. Although questioning the meaning of it at the end. Whereas a Serbian film is that final, there is no more electricity that will revive this thing. And so we moved to ghosts and demons, but we're not going to talk about that here. But what we are going to talk about
It's Britney, bitch.
Looking sick and sexy fight. And I love what you do. Don't you know that you're toxic? And you're gonna hear me roar. Give me more. Give me more. Give me more. Give me more. You're gonna hear me roar. We clawed, we chained our hearts in vain. We jumped, never asking why. I was born this way. Shake a little something on the floor. I need that to get me off. Sweat until my clothes come off. I came in like a wrecking ball. I came in like a wrecking ball. It's getting late to give you up. I took a sip from the devil's cup. Slowly, it's taking over me. Trouble, trouble, trouble. And the saddest fear comes creeping in. Don't you know that you're toxic? Let's make the most of the night like we're gonna die young. Trouble, trouble, trouble.
I want your ugly, I want your disease. I want your everything as long as it's free. I want your love.
Shine bright like a diamond. Shine bright like a diamond.
But this is the world that most people saw in the media in the aughts. And that is, we saw these hyper-glamorous, hyper-sexualized young women performing in videos and on these big stage shows. They're all the children of Madonna, so to speak. And I often call them the Hetairai. And I call them the Hetairai for a reason. These were the upper class of courtesans, or prostitutes in ancient Greece. And some of them were famous throughout their cities. And to me, we've created these Diva Hetairai, these global icons of sexuality. And they are related to Madonna's image of trying to be this kind of like pro-porn feminist icon, but they're different. And there's a lot of things that make them different. Interestingly, they often all have single names, like Britney, Christina, Lady Gaga, well, that's two names, Katy for Katy Perry, Rihanna, Beyonce, Miley Cyrus, Taylor Swift, Taylor. But these girls are all, and the style goes all the way almost to the end of the teens. It's long-lived. It starts in 1999 with Britney Spears and continues through people like Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus. I do think Billie Eilish is something different. But nevertheless, they are very, very important. Consider the symbolism connected with Britney Spears. She is this dewy, moist, seductive bauble of a person. I remember a friend of mine who was, quite a few years younger to me, thought she was really pretty. And to me, she didn't look pretty at all. She just looks like, just like, I can see behind the pose. I can see behind the makeup. But, so she is out there. Now, interestingly enough, she's not, who's making the video? Is she? No. She is, in fact, on Madonna's label, and I am sure Madonna is back there somewhere pushing, saying, go that way. And in fact, there is that very important moment where Madonna christens her by kissing her on the lips publicly while performing. But she's also being produced. And all of these acts that I've mentioned, there are often only a handful of producers behind them. Some of them, like Dr. Luke and Max Martin, literally have had their hands in every one of these performers. They are paid astronomical amounts to come in and get this specific sound that is such an earworm and so commercially successful. But here's the problem. Take Britney Spears. She is what? Just this girl. And all this pressure comes on her. And she's supposed to be this perfect image. And in fact, so then a moment, her life starts to be scrutinized. Her strange off and on wedding at Las Vegas. Her relationships. And then what happens is she gets pregnant. And there she is on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. And eventually it all becomes too much for her. And she cracks, literally, I think. And she's getting tattoos. She's starting to put on pounds. She walks into a place and asks for like the shears and starts zipping her hair off. And then for a few months she just looks like a woman you wouldn't want to get next to anywhere. She just looks like this embittered young woman who has no hope in life. It looks like trailer trash. Looks like she's just another white trash girl. And I think there's a lot of this double-sided mask image of these people. Not all of them. I think Beyonce is probably pretty classy on and off the stage. But we're certainly watching a very seductive hall of mirrors. For instance, what's going on with this song by Christina Aguilera?
Dirty. Filthy. Nasty. Nasty. Too dirty to clean my act up. Yeah. If you ain't dirty, you ain't here to party.
Nasty. Filthy. If you're not here to get dirty, you're not here to party.
Wanna get dirty, it's about time for my arrival. Heat is up, ladies, fellas, drop your cups. Bodies back, front to back, move your ass, I like that. Side hip huggers, know for sure. Shake a little something on the floor. I need that, get me off, sweating till my clothes come off.
And who's watching this stuff, by the way? Like I said, my friends in Romania said, do you watch Britney Spears? I said, no. That's for like children. Oh, that's who's watching it. Kids are watching it. Tween girls, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds. They're watching these things. They're just taking all the cosmic splatter of the images, the sexual dirt and the sexual, spectacular nature of it. They're just ingesting it. It's just becoming part of them. But then the song goes on. Listen to these lyrics.
Let's get open, cause of course, still going 8 in the morning. There's no stopping, we'll give it poppin', hot rockin', everyone's rockin'. All you got, just hit the spot. My girls, get your boys, gonna make some noise. Rowdy, gonna get a little on. Get it fired up in a hurry. Wanna get dirty, it's about time that I came to stop that. Ooh, sweat dripping over my body. Dancing, getting just a little naughty. Wanna get dirty, it's about.
And of course, the chorus over and over is dirty, dirty. And the images she's doing, it's almost like it's straight out of some porno thing happening somewhere. Where it's just, just imagine this is almost a gangbang or an orgy or something. It is dirty, it is filthy, just watching this. Maybe you're not seeing the official bits of flesh that are semi-taboo these days. But, oh my goodness, this is not a clean song. But while you're hearing that, if you're sensitive to the lyrics, you're hearing all this stuff, and you're going, you're probably missing the central point of the song, where she talks about it's time for her arrival. What does that mean? What does it mean? Her arrival. It's almost a religious concept. In fact, I would say it is. It has to do with the self, the holy self, but it's also her arrival. You need to see what she's mutating into. Does that sound like anything? Is she in the Matrix? We'll come to that. But it's interesting then to see what she does with the song in a live concert. Oh, it is now religious. She is the Black Madonna. She's dyed her hair back to black, which I assume is probably her natural color. She is, and then of course, I don't go all into this because, I'm not here to show you all the videos, but she opens up and suddenly she's wearing these sexual clothes and she's dancing again. So she's totally making a collision between the sacred and the profane. And yet, make no doubt about it, this is a religious moment. This is a religion. It's a religion of eroticism and a religion of sensuality. It's also the kind of thing that is basically giving the audience permission for their arrival. What does that mean in the context of people desperate to find some sense of identity? Or take Kesha, who used to spell her name with a $ in the S. What is Kesha saying in this song? Take it off. Take it off. Well, I think it refers to clothes. But then eventually, the chorus is, take it off, take it off. Take what off? She sounds like she wants to be wild, like an animal. Now, there are two versions of this video. One version is the kids playing around in some dusty, abandoned motel. Looks like it's out in the deserts of Southern California. The other version, though, is in some club with, it's dark and everyone's wearing glow-in-the-dark kind of paints. And it really has this aura of the demonic about it. And that's not an accident. And she's not, I don't think she believes in that she's, conjuring demons. I think she's just playing with the imagery for the same reason that Christina Aguilera is playing with the image of dirty, of being a whore, essentially. That they're playing with these images because they've been infected by all of the history that it took to get to us here. All of that stuff in the underground in the 80s that bubbled up in the 90s, that became commercialized at the end of the 90s. They're all infected by it. And now what they're doing is they're taking the most commercial version, but also they are breaking taboos in a way by creating the vision of the hypersexualized female. But they're not being Venus. They're being the Hetairai. They're being the public prostitute, the courtesan. They are obviously way out of anyone's league, and yet at the same time, they are presenting this image to us. Let's watch the end of this video and I'm going to switch it over in a second to the dark video, where everyone becomes, otherkin. And here is a group you've never heard on. The name of the group, what a clunky name, Live on Release. And they're doing a song called I'm Afraid of Britney Spears. And let's listen to a few minutes of this. And this was done around 2001 or so, and it was hopeless because there was a thing that was happening in the Aughts, and it was a battle between what was called rockism and poptism or popism. And essentially the poptists were working. And that is to say, there was this idea. Now, I'm going to let this guy explain to you what's going on here. But these poor girls in Live on Release, they're doing like an end of the 90s style, pop punk style, hoping to go up against Britney Spears. They're afraid of Britney Spears because Britney's style harkens. They can sense that it harkens something else. These girls would disappear and never have a chance. But let's listen to this guy talking about the battle between the difference between rockism and popism.
As music historian Michael Markham writes in his A Little Poptimism for Tchaikovsky, is it the job of music critics to understand and continue to enforce the greatness of the gross fugue, a work whose impact was limited by design and whose cultural influence has been marginal at best, or to understand Rossini, whose music made up the soundtrack of millions of people across multiple generations? Should critics reflect the taste of the people or push them into new, difficult places? This shift in musical taste has occurred as many people have moved towards the latter school of thought, known as poptimism. Poptimism sees value in the music of the charts, in what people are actually listening to. It is a rebellion against the philosophy it defines as rockism. Khalifa Sanfei's 2004 essay, The Rap Against Rockism, one of the founding essays of poptimism, defines rockism as idolizing the authentic old legend or underground hero while mocking the latest pop star, lionizing punk while barely tolerating disco, loving the live show and hating the music video, extolling the growling performer while hating the lip syncer. Poptimism was the backlash against this. It criticized the mythologizing these authentic old legends and pointed out they were not immune from the market forces of the music industry. Haven't Pink Floyd and Nirvana sold more records than Taylor Swift? They argued that a great song could be made by creating a new spin on an old form rather than abandoning form altogether. The elitist ivory tower of rockism was also socially questionable with its focus on a canon of mainly white male artists. Cultural capital was something that only white straight men were able to acquire. The genres ignored by rockism were made by or associated with women, people of colour, or LGBTQ people.
And essentially what happens in the course of the aughts is that we see the tail end of the rock story. Just the dying dregs. There's still good music, good rock music. Radiohead is a very important band throughout the period. There was a great Swedish garage rock revival in the first half of the aughts. Groups like the Hives and Sahara Hot Nights were pretty cool. Or the Helicopters. A lot of metal going around, but now there's so many different genres that no one style speaks for everyone anymore. There isn't, although occasionally the dinosaurs of rock, AC/DC or the Rolling Stones, will wheel themselves out. White Stripes is probably the last group of any originality to come out of the rock line that has a significant both commercial impact and creative impact. And White Stripes eventually fades away by the early teens. And so pop music wins. Pop music is seen as being superficial, or rather all about style, whereas rockism was seen as being about substance in some way. I think you could break this down. It's not nearly this simple. But many of the shallower styles of pop music, what seemed like shallow styles, are being championed now. That somehow the surface matters more than what's underneath, or rather, the surface is the substance.
Well, I might as well tell you right now that I can't think of another thing I want to hear you say.
I am back. You didn't notice it, but it's another 12 hours later or more. And the reason for that is I was suddenly overcome by the most vicious attack of food poisoning I've ever had in my life. I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but it was really bad. And, literally had me wondering if I was going to survive. It was that bad. And I'm trying to think of what the culprits were, food-wise, and I have a couple that are on my list as like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. Particularly a can that sat for over a year, including through the rather hot summer last year. So, anyway, we're going to continue. If I was looking a little flush or something, I was. And, that's life, though. And I'm still not feeling 100% up to scratch, but I feel like I've got to finish this video. And you need it. And I need to get it off my head so that I can rest. So another hour, and I'll be good. Let's continue. Meanwhile, where were we?
An army of vampires.
They're coming here.
Fantasy and geekdom. What do I mean? Well, I think for many people, they will remember the aughts as a time of Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and a lot of young adult fiction. Particularly the younger you are, the more you will remember this way. And in one way, it's just like, well, that's fine. That's great. People were reading books and they had this imaginative aspect. And the movies that went along with it were, digital works of art. Consider Lord of the Rings. But what did it really mean? And how does it relate to where we are now? Well, it very definitely does. You could say that it was the Harry Potter books that started this particular trend. And of course, they started in the late 90s. I purposely didn't mention them last time because it opens this door that I'm about to go through right now. But Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling's books became beyond popular. They became the legends and myths of a certain generation, which is one reason why that generation, taking those cues from her books, have been so miffed that she hasn't gone all the way through the door to where they are today. Although she certainly made steps of getting a certain distance. But people have puzzled, why Harry Potter? Why the Harry Potter books? One thing I heard, which makes a lot of sense to me, is that the books talk about magical children whose parents don't quite understand them. And that in many ways, this reflects exactly the situation of the younger children and youth of the time would have been the millennial generation. It reflects them very much because this generation now has access to all of this digital tackle, shall we call it, that the older generations come to very unnaturally. I certainly do. I mean, I've chosen to, obviously, I can make a video, I can edit it, I can put it on YouTube, but I am very questioning about all sorts of other aspects of it. But a person who is younger than me by a substantial margin is not going to question this world of special devices and special forms of communication and special forms of thinking that they now have. They won't question it. They will see themselves as being different substantially than their older generation. Of course, my thought is, well, we've all still got the same problems. Technology amplifies these problems, but it doesn't change them. Well, Harry Potter led, obviously, to a host of other young adult fiction franchises, and that word is really key to where we're going here in entertainment. Everything becomes a franchise after a while. And, of course, there's that whole tendency when making the movies of splitting the last book into two parts, which is really funny. I think that when you have things like The Hunger Games or Twilight, these things are very much property of the aughts generation, the people who were coming of age during that time. However, they are also very much sold to that generation. That is to say, they are so much of what we're seeing now is a marketing ploy. Like I said, everything is now, the host of everything is now technology. People almost don't understand real life anymore. And because of that, even their entertainments are completely technological in nature, which is why I think that the idea that Harry Potter is some sort of reflection of the youth of the day is a very good one. And also, there's the notion of alchemy that goes through Harry Potter. And we'll come up against these kinds of notions. Alchemy is very much a Gnostic notion that you can kind of penetrate the veil of matter and come to the new world. Very much akin to something we're coming to down the road here, the Matrix.
This is the One Ring, forged by the Dark Lord Sauron. He needs only this ring to cover all the lands of darkness.
What must I do?
The ring must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fires of Mount Doom.
Sauron's forces are already moving.
Come on, Frodo!
They will find the ring and kill the one who carries it.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my axe. Carry the face of us all, little one.
We're coming too! Mr. Frodo's not going anywhere without me.
You will face evil, and you will defeat it.
Of course, perhaps I would say the supreme fantasy achievement of the early part of the Aughts was the Lord of the Rings series. We will not discuss the Hobbit trilogy that follows it. But the Lord of the Rings series was perhaps the best of all of this. And the reason for it is, A, it was based on Tolkien. I did not read, I have to confess, did not read all the Harry Potter books, and actually was required to transfer one on a tape that had unspooled for someone so that they could listen to it, an audio tape of the first book, and I was just like so bored to tears by the writing. But Lord of the Rings is a bona fide classic of not just young adult literature, but of literature. Harry Potter, I'm sure, I'm going to get feedback on this, but Harry Potter is a classic. Yeah, maybe. Is it a classic on the level of Lord of the Rings? No. Period. End of story. And so Lord of the Rings was something that you really had that you could bite into. Now, I did watch all the Harry Potter movies. And the Harry Potter movies, I got the gist of the story. And quite frankly, I felt like, okay, it was interesting. I liked The Prisoner of Azkaban the best.
Sirius Black has escaped from Azkaban prison. He's a murderer.
Sirius Black is the reason the Potters are dead.
And now he wants to finish what he started.
I want you to swear to me you won't go looking for Black.
Why would I go looking for someone who wants to kill me?
But, no, it wasn't that interesting to me. As a breathing, thinking adult, no. It didn't seem, it only hit these vague themes. Whereas Lord of the Rings got a lot closer. I think this is Peter Jackson's finest hour, and I don't think he's had many since then, and not too many before then. Somehow he became the right person at the right time to direct this. And because he got to the subtleties of that ring and holding the ring of power. And in a sense, J.K. Rowling's held the ring. And it sort of corrupted her. So did everyone in the YA market hold that ring. I find one of the problems is that these books, all geared towards young adults, we had books that were geared towards youngish adults when I was young, Wrinkle in Time, but the point is, we didn't discuss these books like they were divine scripture. We didn't treat them specially. We would be given these books in school to read, and we were like, okay, great, Phantom Tollbooth, great, but I appreciated much more the books like Alice in Wonderland and Wind in the Willows, the genuine bona fide classics, because I could see, not that Wrinkle in Time isn't a classic. I actually met Madeleine L'Engle while I was in New York, went over to her house for a book writers meeting. I've got no criticism of Madeleine L'Engle. But I will say this, that these books, I originally, and I thought a lot of people did too, older folks said, well, at least they're reading now. They being the younger folks. They're reading again. Well, great. Yeah, they were reading. And my hope, as I felt it was for other people, was then they would eventually get to the great works of literature. Well, I'm sure some did, but an awful lot never did. An awful lot just stayed ensconced in fantasy and science fiction. Not that there isn't great fantasy and science fiction, but the point is they stayed with it with this mindset, and it's the mindset of the geek. And the geek, to me, isn't the same as a person, there are no Dostoevsky geeks. Why? Because Dostoevsky didn't write stuff that you could make jokes about, that you could, it's like the difference between a math geek and a true mathematician is the math geek makes all these math jokes. I think that's one of the hallmarks of the geek. The geek lives in a special world divorced from the rest of us. But it's a world that, it doesn't hold weight. And that's the problem with all of these series and the fantasy takeover. Eventually we had movies like The Chronicles of Narnia.
Aslan, we need your help.
I know, but understand, the future of Narnia rests on your courage.
If it's a war Aslan wants, it's a war he shall get.
Interestingly enough, this was given a Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings kind of spin with a big battle. And in fact, this happened all the time. When Alice in Wonderland came out, Tim Burton's version, it was given a Lord of the Rings type battle. It's very strange how this all happened. Then again, of course, you could say, well, it reflects the Aughts and the fears over September 11th, and maybe it does. And one of the things about the Lord of the Rings is that it gave one that sense of courage, which was a good thing. However, one of the most frightened places I've ever experienced was a Tolkien fan club meeting in the 1970s at Sonoma State University in California. And these people were insane. And they kept me from reading more of Tolkien for an awful long time. But then again, the Bible is the greatest work of literature in the world, and how much insanity has been based on that. People can become geeks and freaks about anything. And I think we owe it to ourselves to take life more seriously. I think that the person who gets stuck in fantasy, fantasy is great. Don't get me wrong. Right now I'm going through fairy tales. I love it. But, I'm speaking as someone from an older generation. I did not get stuck, as General Patton would say, I didn't get stuck in the hedgerow country. I got out and started getting the army pointed towards the right direction, and that is towards meaning. So I started reading Solzhenitsyn and Dostoevsky. I started reading the great works of American literature. To this day, I'm always exploring. I keep one finger in the fantasy, sci-fi, horror realm. I love horror fiction, horror films, But the point is that these things became lifestyles for people. And this fantasy imagery started to seep into everything. And of course, it goes into video games. But then we come to comic book movies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. It goes into, there's so much with the Star Wars universe, the MCU, the Marvel movies, the DCU, the DC comic book movies. I think Dark Knight is great. That's one of Christopher Nolan's finest hours. But I've heard people say it's one of the greatest movies ever made. And I go like, no, it's not. And I'll tell you why. It is saddled with all the conventions of a comic book movie. All the long, interminable chases, all the fight scenes and stuff like this. And to a person whose major source of literature is Harry Potter or even The Lord of the Rings, if that's as far as you've gotten, you don't understand depth. If you think that the Joker in that was a real portrayal of human evil, I mean, don't get me wrong. Heath Ledger's portrayal in Dark Knight, in The Dark Knight, is astoundingly good, and comes absolutely nowhere near any villain character written by Dostoevsky. Why do I keep mentioning Dostoevsky? Because for me, he is the greatest fiction writer. But one could also point to Shakespeare. You know, you look at characters in Shakespeare, they are living, breathing humanity. Dostoevsky's character, no villain is purely evil. No good person is purely good. There are no Captain Marvels in Dostoevsky. You can quote me on that. Speaking of which, then there was the rather strange event in late 2009, lasted through too much of 2010, of the film Avatar, which has to be the most forgettable major blockbuster that was ever made. And a lot of people went to see it because of the fad, as it turned out, of 3D glasses. By the way, 3D movies are always a fad. But anyway, Avatar came. I saw it in December of 2009. I happened to be in Los Angeles at the time instead of Alaska. And we all went and saw it and spent way too much money. I think by the time we bought the glasses, it was like $15. Way too much money. And I'm watching this going like, Dances with Wolves with Aliens in Fern Gully. Okay, next. It's just like, there was no depth to this whatsoever. It was propagandistic. It was, and I'm sitting there going, is this what we're doing? And the answer is, yes, this is what we're doing. So many of the Marvel movies and DC movies are all this. Nevertheless, we're going to save the MCU for the teens, because that's when it really becomes important. And interestingly enough, the distance between geekdom and our next subject, conspiracy theories, is almost nothing at all.
There will be signs that mark her return. There will be secrets that reveal her destiny. There will be a journey that will make you believe.
Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
It's the question that drives us, Neo.
What is the Matrix? It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You are a slave born into a prison for your mind.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy.
Try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague, and we are the cure.
The Matrix. A couple people mentioned, how come you didn't discuss The Matrix in your late 90s series? Because I think its meaning is about what's happening now than it was about the 90s. And then, of course, there were the two sequels, which we shall say no more about. But no, The Matrix turns out to be, to me, a rather disturbing work, and not for the reasons that a lot of people think. It's disturbing because what it did was, well, it borrowed from Jean Baudrillard and the idea of the simulacra. However, it took it one step further. Baudrillard never was saying that we live in a simulation in the way the Matrix movie paints. What Baudrillard was saying is that we have created a fictitious panorama which surrounds us. We've created it. We inhabit it, we live it. We, with a slight parallax vision, can look slightly sideways and say, oh, okay, we're disconnected from nature. We have problems with relationships. Our technology is overwhelming us. We can see these things. It's not like we're little battery chargers like in the Matrix where we're completely, the concept of the simulation in the Matrix being that literally everything before us. Now, it takes having gotten to video games to get to this point. And that everything is a simulation. In other words, that some great video game designer has already constructed the prison we are in right now. This particular notion is extraordinarily influential on almost everything right now, and not in good ways. For instance, so let me try to pull this apart, because this is really key to a lot of what else I have to say here. The concept in the Matrix is that we are not aware of the simulation that we are in. We are essentially in a large video game, and that we are not aware of the simulation. Now, then you have the famous, if you take the red pill, you shall wake up. And the problem with that is people use that all the time. And of course, what's happened is red pill in the Matrix has now become equated to red versus blue in politics. Well, this is all complete bullshit, because you don't understand what that red pill is in the Matrix. Let me try to explain it to you. What the Matrix is suggesting is that there are worlds beyond our world in which, if we can get into that world, we shall understand that this world that we're in is an illusion. It is also a fallen illusion, a dark illusion, and that if we get out of it, we will be able to ascend to higher levels of truth and find out who we really are and control our representation in this simulation. Okay, here's the point. Now, Neo has been pointed out to be pretty much a Christ figure, but he's not the Christ figure of the Bible. Get this through your heads. He's not really Jesus Christ. He is the Gnostic version of Jesus Christ, here to pierce the illusion and to let you go beyond to your true self. This is pure Gnosticism. Rarely has a film come along that has so entranced people and given them and reawakened in a public way such an old philosophy, or as the Christians would call it, an old heresy. Now, I've done my time studying Gnosticism, so it might make an interesting discussion for the future. I'm not going to do a deep dive on it here, but let's just say it goes like this. In Gnosticism, there are many layers of reality and spirituality and things like this. The bottom layer is the reality that is we are in. And or I think in some versions it can even go lower. But basically we're in a pretty low version of reality. We're stuck with this material stuff. And the point of Gnosticism is gnosis, knowledge, that you learn where you are and get through to the next layer. Now, this is an ancient philosophy. It has been expressed in alchemy. The Philosopher's Stone was the thing which would allow you to essentially make pure materials like gold out of base materials like lead, but that was also an entire philosophical concept to get you to the next layer. Some people have said existentialism is essentially Gnosticism, where all of matter, everything we see around us is corrupted, and all you can do is choose kind of randomly what to do. But it's Gnosticism with the top cut off. That is to say, there are no more spiritual layers to go up to. Nevertheless, that existentialist vision of Jean-Paul Sartre is what the reality that we are supposed to try to escape. So the point is to keep going up. Jesus, in this version, is from a higher level who comes back to us to tell us how to get to the next layer. This is why I have a real problem with putting together Christian images with psychedelic images. Psychedelic philosophy is almost all about escaping this layer to go to higher levels of consciousness. Very Gnostic. So, interestingly enough, the red pill is to do what? It's to allow you to escape to the next Gnostic level. It is not to allow you simply to see the truth. The only way to simply see the truth is to see the truth in reality. And that takes work, and it's sometimes very painful. The truth is, look at the creators of the Matrix. The Wachowski brothers, no. They both eventually transitioned into their actual Gnostic selves. Think about that for a minute. That's the problem. This also opens the door for so many conspiracy theories. So, there are actually people, and I can't believe how pea-brained people are, that you watch a movie made by a huge Hollywood studio and you suddenly come up with this idea that, well, maybe we are in a simulation. And there are people who take this seriously. Excuse me. It's just like, no, I'm sorry, it's not. As someone who has been around bears, as someone who has held the hand of his mother as she is dying, I can tell you the truth. That is the purest bullshit thing that has ever been said. And it comes straight out of the media propaganda factory of Hollywood. Do you get it? That's the actual truth. That's not a red pill. That's reality. I'm tired of pills. People keep saying you're black pilled, you're red pilled, you're blue pilled, whatever. I'm just tired of it. I'm done with it. Why? Because it opens the door on all of this conspiracy nonsense. Now, of course, this conspiracy nonsense was then buttressed by the awesome fact that we all basically saw this massive building collapse, set of buildings collapse, live on television in 2001. And I just knew, as soon as I saw them fall, I'd already been studying conspiracy theories for quite a while before this. I said, here they come. Here come the conspiracy theories. You cannot even believe your own eyes.
9/11 will go down as one of the darkest days in U.S. history.
The official story is that Osama bin Laden was the terrorist mastermind behind the attack. But some believe 9/11 was a smokescreen for a far bigger American conspiracy. One that would ultimately lead to war against Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein and allow the United States access to Iraq's most prized commodity, oil.
And I'm sitting there going like, have you seen the image of Bush sitting in the Florida classroom? He looks like a stunned idiot. This is not the work of a great plan. Of course, but then the thing about conspiracy theories is that they are never falsifiable. You can always reinterpret everything you see. Of course, the OG of conspiracy theories, or at least in the recent years, is the Kennedy assassination. And people have gone over this and over this. I mean, I've read tons of Kennedy conspiracy literature since the 70s. Since I became aware of all this stuff, I started getting into it. I have recordings, records of, the Rush to Judgment, Mark Lane. I have the books. I have, just all this stuff. And then at a certain point you realize something's gotten a little, weird about all this. It's like they're trying to explain too much. And then it was sometime, it was around 68 or 69, that these guys played a prank. Let's watch that prank.
Some members of Discordians were working at Playboy magazine. And Thornley decided that he was going to use Playboy magazine to start an experiment that would make people see how absurd all conspiracy theories really were. He called it Operation Mindfuck. In 1969, he and Greg Hill began Operation Mindfuck by placing a false letter in the Playboy letters page. They put it between another letter, asking if gun fanatics had small penises, and one from a man asking about the physical danger to his testicles from heavy petting. Thornley's fake letter asked whether all the political assassinations in America were really being masterminded by a single secret society, and the society it named was the Illuminati. It said that the Illuminati were behind all the chaos and the fear that was now gripping America. He and the other Discordians then proceeded to spread this idea all across America through the counterculture, in magazines and books, and even in plays. Thornley's aim was to try and break the spell of conspiracy theories by making people see the absurdity of believing them. And he had chosen the Illuminati for the experiment because no one could possibly believe that an 18th century organisation from Bavaria was really, in the second half of the 20th century, the secret rulers of the modern world. It was clearly ridiculous.
I first heard about the Illuminati in 1971 or 72, and it has been slowly making its way through culture ever since. Going from kind of this, hey, have you heard about the Illuminati? To this incredible thing. By the time you get to the aughts, YouTube is awash in Illuminati theories.
It's like I would film things like that. I would encourage like everybody, all different types of sexual. But there is that thing where it's like a lot of people misunderstand me with S&M and they think it's super. And I have to like explain to people how, like, where it's more like you're tied down because you need to like be able to like have somebody hold you down and keep you still, or like you would fight and have something down, or like. Once you're beaten, like, or something. It's like it comes from that real place of like, you know, as opposed to being accessories or something like. It's like with tattoos and things. Like I've always never known there's like that time where he's like, oh, I have tattoos. And after a while, you're like, you can explain them and they can mean it. It's just comes from that real life.
What are conspiracy theories? Conspiracy theories are the faith of people without faith. What do I mean? Yes, of course, Christians and people who have other sorts of beliefs can all believe in conspiracy theories. But nevertheless, it says something about they say they're a Christian, but really, X is behind everything.
Beyoncé is many things to many people. Muse, icon, trailblazer, Sasha Fierce. But there's one crown the Queen has disavowed, the Illuminati. For centuries, conspiracy theorists have speculated about the Illuminati, a super-secret society of the intellectual and political elite, a society that supposedly runs the world. But some conspiracy theorists claim that Beyoncé and husband Jay-Z are the reigning king and queen of this centuries-old organization.
One of the ways you can tell a conspiracy theory is that what is being said is totally interchangeable with other conspiracy theories. So, one person's Jews is another person's Catholics, is another person's Freemasons, or it's the FBI, or it's the simulation, or it's the psyops, or it's the aliens, or the lizard people, or the fascists, or the communists, or the Illuminatis, or the liberal agenda, or, you just fill it in. Now people are talking about Trumpism like there's some secret thing. Who's talking about Trumpism? The people on the left. It's a conspiracy theory. Who's talking about, it's just like everyone after a while has got a conspiracy theory. There were these books that came out. I remember the first one was 50 Great Conspiracy Theories. I think they're up to, I don't know, maybe they're up to 100 now. But they kept putting out editions of the books, and they would add 10 more conspiracy theories every time they'd put the books out. What was interesting about that book is, for all the talk of conspiracy theories, they in their preface, they say, well, we're not going to discuss the conspiracy theory about the Jews, which is practically the OG of conspiracy theories. Them and the Freemasons. But the truth is, it's almost like everyone has been operating under conspiracy theories. I think that the war in Iraq was started on the basis of a conspiracy theory. That is to say that conspiracy theories now motivate the very central halls of government. Think about it. And they motivate so much of its people. That's why it's so easy. Now, the conspiracy theories to me are the result of years of living with media, visual media in particular, years of propaganda. The effect of propaganda upon people is either you submit and do the things that propaganda does, or you see through it, you are quote-unquote red-pilled, and then you start living with a whole nother set of propaganda. Is nother a word? Yeah, anyway. So, that's where we live now. We live with a faith in conspiracy theories, which we are convinced are correct. Yes, but have you watched the Yuri Bezmenov videos? To which I have. To which I'm saying they're pretty old, and I'm pretty sure it didn't all unfold the way he was talking 30 years later. But if you're into the conspiracy theory, then what you do is you say, yes, but, and you account for the new facts, and you throw them in. It's very religious. And of course, history has a way of presenting things to us that simply confirm everyone's conspiracy theories.
The first time the Dow Jones Industrial Average passed the 13,000 mark.
Another milestone for the market, 14,000 on the money.
Record-breaking kickoff to the fourth quarter as the Dow Jones Industrial Average closes at a new all-time record high.
Bear Stearns is not in trouble. I mean, if anything, they're more likely to be taken over. Don't move your money from there. That's just being silly.
The closing numbers on the markets today, at one point the market fell as if down a well, over 700 points.
Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%. We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%. The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Almost everything there completely wiped out. And the NASDAQ, everything and more has been completely wiped out.
The Dow traders are standing there watching in amazement, and I don't blame them.
Their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours the world economy would have collapsed.
Was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
Working the phone say a lot of their customers are freaked out waiting to see how low the Dow will go.
What started in America last year has now spread to every part of the world.
We're down 9% today. The Xetra DAX over in Frankfurt is down by 9%. The Paris market down by 9%. Austria, which was briefly suspended earlier on in the day, is down by nearly 11%.
Cicero was right. We're in the last days of this country surviving.
Steve Leisman, Treasury runs the printing presses to print the dollars. Some of the dollars go into the Fed. Fed takes the dollars, buys Treasury bonds that the Treasury issues to raise money. Money goes back into the Fed. Isn't this all kind of one big Ponzi scheme?
Sophisticated term for that, Dennis. We call it monetizing the debt.
Will the Federal Reserve monetize this debt? The Federal Reserve will not monetize the debt.
Now, I'm not going to embarrass myself with an explanation of the economics behind the 2008 financial crisis. I think I understand it. But rather than talking about mortgages and subprime and, Bear Stearns and all of this stuff, I just simply want to point out that these things had a delayed effect. And we're going to meet some of those delayed effects when we discuss the teens next time. And of course, there was a call for a new world order. Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, gives this speech. And you can hear this as politicians saying, we can't allow the financial institutions to go so very wrong in the future. Or you can see it through conspiracy glasses and recognize that in no subtle way is he saying anything but it's time to reveal ourselves to the masses.
For the first time, we have a common approach round the world to cleaning up banks' balance sheets and restoring lending. We are engaging in a deep process of reform and restructuring of our international financial system for now and for the future. And we have maintained our commitment to help the world's poorest. And we have put more money aside for that and also for a green recovery. These are not just a single collection of actions. This is collective action, people working together at their best. I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation.
And then comes hope and change.
Again, Latino vote here. It's a tough one for the Republicans, but for the sake of argument, let's give him that. I can get him to 259. I'm going to tell you right now, Campbell, I cannot see John McCain winning Iowa, winning Hawaii, or winning any of these. So I can't get him to 270. Even if there's a miracle, here, and that goes Republican to get him to 266. Now, we're going to watch these results come in.
It's beautiful. It's absolutely. And I mean, this is just look around. It's all young people, all colors. I mean, just who else could have done this?
They knew their man would do it and were already talking about it long before the maths
had caught up with their emotions.
When President Kennedy was elected and he said we're going to go to the moon, and somehow NASA found a way, and I feel like America's getting ready to go to great heights.
Yeah, I think it's cool because we're living history right now.
He represents change, hope, progress.
When Obama's victory moment finally came, none of us knew how it would consume their passions.
Think it could happen?
I never thought in my lifetime that it would happen. But it happened tonight. It's a reality and we did it.
Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Obama politically. Again, the point of this, just as I didn't talk too much about Bush politically, the point of this series has not been to get into the minutia of politics or to hit everyone's favorite talking points. The point has been this: to discuss how these things created the mindsets we now find ourselves in. So one of the things about Obama was, particularly going into the elections, he talked a great game. He talked about uniting America. He talked about giving people a chance to hear each other again. And in a sense, and he all this talk about hope and change. But what's weird is that the hope was way too high. Way too high. That hope would eventually unleash Black Lives Matter, which then would become a very serious issue in the teens. We will come to that next time. That hope would also unleash the Tea Party in response. Now, I remember in Alaska, I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a butcher, and he said, "Yeah, I'm not going to vote for Obama. It sounds too much like Osama." And I thought, well, there you go. That's astute political reasoning. But it was very similar to the anti-Robert Bork campaign by the leftists in the 90s, who said Bork, and they put up a big picture of pork. So their whole anti-Bork campaign was Bork, pork. Again, this is the stupidity of the level we've arrived at. This is the stupidity of conspiracy theories. But it's also the stupidity of our hope.
I, Barack Hussein Obama,
I,
do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
faithfully the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States faithfully.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President. All the best wishes.
What Obama did was play into these problems rather than address them. Would it have been great? Have we had anybody who is a truly public figure in an eloquent manner that people can understand talk about the need to recover dialogue again? I mean, seriously. And I can't think of a major public figure. I can think of minor public figures. But I can't think of a major one who had any of the reins of political office. Obama could have done this, and he didn't. Instead, what he did was he played his card immediately, realizing he had a full house on the left, played his card, got the Obamacare thing passed, which really pissed off the right, and still continues to do so. Interestingly enough, Middle Eastern wars continued apace under Obama. Drone strikes became Obama's way of protecting the troops at the expense of whomever was under them, so we didn't feel like we were paying such a cost anymore, although, lots of people on the ground who had nothing to do with the war were dying, as well as, the enemy. So, we had this whole situation where basically it was business as usual. Like I say, he talked a good game. I will give it to Obama. He was always able to communicate. My problem is he never communicated about the things he should have. He should have dampened down the tensions in America. Instead, and we'll see this next week when we talk about the teens, by the end of his time as president, he inflamed the tensions. Not a good thing.
Somos Anonymous. Somos Legion.
ونحن نتسامح مع جراء.
Understand that something is horribly wrong with this world.
And then we come to something new. Something which is going to really also affect life as we now know it. The emergence of two different, I don't know if organizations are the right things, but two different ideas. One was Anonymous, and the other is Wikileaks, and particularly Julian Assange. Anonymous is what? Hacktivist collective, an organization, loose coterie. I think loose coterie probably fits it, but they tended to have a similar viewpoint. Hacktivist meaning someone who is an activist, but is also a hacker. And so they use their computer skills, their coding skills, their hacking skills to worm their way into various sites and create mischief, which would be very inconvenient for the people that they are pointing their lasers at. So they went after people like Scientology or the Westboro Baptist Church. And this is a case where now, going after Scientology, they're a really large organization. I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. But the Westboro Baptist Church, they may be kind of moronic, but why would you have these people? It's kind of like people from the 21st century going after people from the 19th century. It's like, there's some small country in Africa that still believes things you don't want. So you're going after them with your, laser-focused technological artillery. The whole world is filled with people who are homophobic. What are you going to do about it? You going to go after them all? I don't think you can. But it's interesting. The dangers of... I can see the pluses. You can go after these large corporations, which they did. But at the same time, such people can also decide to attack something just because it has a different political perspective. So I can see these people going after pro-life people, going after, transphobic people now. This is a huge problem, and it was recognized as such. And, of course, America had the Patriot Act, and it went after the core of Anonymous and got to many of them. Not all of them. There's still lots of anonymous people out there, but the FBI started taking the anonymous hackers, catching them when they'd make a silly mistake, and then incorporating them into their own web. So where are your skills now? They're in the service of the very people you were hoping to trip up. One of the crucial elements of Anonymous was its use of the mask from V for Vendetta. the Alan Moore comic book, Alan Moore being the writer, and they had created this very iconic mask of Guy Fawkes, the guy who tried to blow up the English Parliament. How did he become a hero in this? Hard to say. But nevertheless, this mask, this impassive, smiling 17th century mask, I love the image of it, then started showing up in protests around the world, particularly protests against things like the IMF or the WTO. Protests saying, basically, we don't want you guys controlling things. And it took on a life of its own. A life which we will see very shortly leads to the world we're in today. And then there's Wikileaks and Julian Assange. Wikileaks is essentially born out of the frustrations of a lack of a real anti-war movement of any effectiveness in the aughts. These wars were just going on in the Middle East, and there were occasionally little scuffles about them, but the September 11th thing was so big, they couldn't gain the same sort of traction that the anti-war protests in the 60s against the Vietnam War did. So Assange, through someone like Bradley Manning, who later became Chelsea Manning, who was an Army intelligence analyst, and passed Assange over 750,000 classified and unclassified sensitive military and diplomatic documents. And what Assange did through WikiLeaks is began to publish these things. And through doing so, Assange became a very serious public enemy of the United States. Chelsea Manning was eventually caught, but nevertheless, it was Assange they were after. Now, there's the whole story of Assange being locked up in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK for years, and I'm not going into all of that because it's not germane. What is germane to the fact is I think actually Assange was doing something important. And he was fighting back against the USA Patriot Act. He was fighting back against the fact that government now had unlimited ability to spy on its own people. That we now live in this world where if you're in most major cities of the world that have any technological competence, you're being spied on daily. We think nothing when we see these images of people walking down the street with little squares hovering around their face with visual recognition software, facial recognition software. We think nothing of that. We are totally being spied on. One of the things I like about Georgia is that I feel like I'm a bit outside of that. I'm back in the 1970s. Yeah, there's a little bit of video surveillance here, but not nearly anything like the major powers of the Western world, or the totalitarian powers of China, or, it's like we now live in this world that is very much looking for your data. And I think Julian Assange was trying to fight that because he understood that the secret world of the government, which you don't need a conspiracy to explain to you, is indeed a very dangerous world.
So secret planning is secret usually for a reason, because if it's abusive, it is opposed. So it is our task to find secret abusive plans and expose them where they can be opposed before they are implemented. Because if they are exposed by the implementation, by people suffering from that abuse, then the abuse has already occurred and it's too late.
So 2011 turns out to be the pivotal period by my reckoning. You may disagree, feel free to. between that first period and what would develop in the teens in America and the tensions of what some have called a cold civil war. Some people have said, well, no, it's 2008. But 2008 was more or less the chickens coming home to roost. Like I say, it had a delayed effect. People didn't immediately all change their lives in 2008. It affected some people, not others. But one of the delayed effects of 2008 came about in 2011. We'll talk about some of that. First, the most important thing. Osama bin Laden is assassinated by the United States government.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. It was nearly 10 years ago that a bright September day was darkened by the worst attack on the American people in our history. The images of 9/11 are seared into our national memory. Hijacked planes cutting through a cloudless September sky, the Twin Towers collapsing to the ground, black smoke billowing up from the Pentagon, the wreckage of Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the actions of heroic citizens saved even more heartbreak and destruction.
Now, this effectively puts an end to the period that starts with September 11th, 2001. We can now safely say the next period has started. And, interestingly enough, watch these people celebrating Osama bin Laden's death and ask yourself, why are they celebrating so much more than anybody in America ever celebrated the end of the Cold War? By the way, Russia is still out there and has regained force. We will mention them in the teens as well.
From Times Square to Ground Zero to the White House, the familiar chant of USA, USA resonated as citizens learned that Osama bin Laden was dead. The announcement sparked immediate jubilation. In Times Square, people gathered around giant news tickers to see the latest updates and take in the moment they heard the world's most wanted terrorist was dead.
Then there was the Arab Spring. Now, the Arab Spring is a very complicated thing. It starts in Tunisia, goes to Egypt, spreads through other countries, eventually results in the Syrian war, which we are still experiencing to this day. But let's watch a little bit of news footage about the beginning of the Arab Spring.
It was the year of people power, of revolution.
Something I've never seen before, a phalanx of men on horseback and on camels.
And bloodshed that doomed dictators.
No one's going home. No one's going to go home. We're in this till the end, even if it means we're going to die.
It started with one man in one country, Tunisia, who set himself on fire when the police confiscated his fruit cart, leaving him with no way to make money. That set off a movement that kicked out longtime President Zainal Abidine Ben Ali. A region was gripped with freedom fever. Fueled by social media, protests erupt in Algeria, then Yemen.
And then finally, the thing which does connect directly back to the 2008 financial crisis, the thing which is going to my way of thinking, be the harbinger of the future, is Occupy Wall Street. And here's what makes it so important. Occupy Wall Street starts off as a protest against the fact that all of the bailout money went to these big banks and institutions. And very little went to the actual rank and file of people. That's what it started off as. By the time Occupy Wall Street was done, it had become the political correctness, the woke culture of the present. These people are living under the things we have discussed in this episode, which is to say, they're living in a mindset of geekdom. So many people. The geek has gone from being the peripheral of the culture to being a central component of the culture. Along with that, the fantasy has also gone into politics. Conspiracy theories are largely fantasies. They are fantasies for people because we need to explain things. We grab at straws. And believe me, every time I read a conspiracy theory, seriously, like I remember reading about the Freemasons, and while you're reading it, man, is this convincing. And if you think your conspiracy theory is the best of all, hey, I've got 5 more for you that will convince you. And they're opposed to each other, but nevertheless, they explain everything. That's one of the hallmarks of the conspiracy religions. And, people have been propagandized into their tribal factions. These things are real. I remember thinking in the 1990s, I was walking down the street in Soho in New York City, and I remember suddenly having this thought. I said, yeah, in the future, it's not going to be so much physical wars, although, there'll be wars here or there, but it's not going to be a global conflagration. It's going to be a war in the mind, first and foremost. It's going to be a war of propaganda and a war of conspiracies and a war of, internal stuff going on and people constantly saying, which side are you on? And as Bob Dylan sang in Desolation Row, everybody is singing, which side are you on? And the Titanic sails at dawn. Yeah, it's the Titanic. And it has been sailing for a while. So I just want you to think about the fact that you, like me, have been propagandized, have been living in a fantasy world, have been living in conspiracies for a long time. I am no different from you. The only difference is that, people have said, well, Bern, when did you take the red pill? And the answer is, if you understood what I said about the red pill in this, you'll understand the answer is, are you out of your mind? Never, because I'm not interested in creating the Gnostic version of Bern, the person who really knows what the other people don't know. I'm interested in this world today, and I'm interested in how do we show love, how do we listen to people, how do we retain our intelligence, how do we learn to read beyond a 10th grade level, how do we learn to watch things on YouTube and have some sort of sense of comprehension. How do we understand history again? How do we let other people speak who totally disagree with us? Well, I think it is possible. And one of the reasons I don't believe in conspiracy theories is because I think, well, for one, there's other forces at work. I think technology is far greater than any conspiracy theory. And I've had arguments with friends who say, yeah, but it's not greater than capitalism, to which I would say, yeah, it is, because it affects every capitalist. He says, yeah, but it requires money to make them all. And you're like, okay. If that's the only arrow you got in your quiver, you haven't got much to say. And so, before we get out of here, I am certain I have not said everything I needed to say. I'm certain I've talked too long. I'm certain you can point out things I should have said. I'm certain that my interpretation is off on some of these things. We're too close. We're still too close to this stuff to really understand it. I would much more trust my interpretations of the 60s, which I've spent an awful lot of time thinking about, or my interpretations of the 70s, or of the punk era, or of the grunge culture, than I would of the things I've said in this video. Except, trust me, I believe every word I said. It's just I'm sure there's room for improvement. Well, I hope you consider it. Consider it, because you're involved in this too now. This is now, we're not talking about ancient history anymore. We're talking about your story at this point. And how do you live in history? How do you swim through the currents? Hopefully against them and not with them. You don't float downstream with, there's a waterfall coming up, and I hope you're not floating towards it. Well, thank you for spending way too long with me again. And I am humbled by the fact that anyone will watch a 2.5, 3 hour video of mine. I mean, who does that? I mean, it's not even Avatar. Okay. Well, remember, anadromous is a word applied to salmon. And it means that it describes salmon swimming upstream. They are anadromous fish. And to swim against the currents and go upstream is what I'm asking you to do. Be an anadromist. Go against the stream.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.